surf it, scroll it, pose it, click it, cross it, crack it, twitch, update it, name it, read it, tune it, print it, scan it, send it, fax, rename it, touch it, bring it, pay it, watch it, turn it, leave it, stock, format it. Technologic.
Metropolis, a work caught between the economic crisis of post-World War I and the emerging decadence of Berlin in the mid-1920s, both condemns the exploitation of the mass proletariat at the hands of a super-industrialist, and yet displays seductive images of futuristic, technologically avant-garde society generated by progressive industrial work. 1984 is perhaps more singular in its focus, to condemn the use of technology in the progressive development of totalitarian policy. And yet, beneath the surface of what defines progress is not the fast expansion into the futuristic skyscrapers of Metropolis, but rather the more sinister use of progressive means to halt human thought and create a static perfection where no past or future exists, rather only a sterile present. The purpose of this video is to explore the perspectives present within Fritz Lang's film Metropolis on technology and progress. The hope is that you will then use this to independently consider how Orwell's novel 1984 presents similar or disparate views as a reflection of context. As context shapes the representations within each text, an understanding of the Weimar Republic to the meaning of Metropolis is central. Germany's involvement in World War I, a decision by the then Kaiser Wilhelm II, was funded through loans rather than generating wealth through national tax. This led directly to severe hyperinflation, where in 1919, one loaf of bread cost 1 German mark, and by 1923, the same loaf of bread cost 200,000 million marks. To add to these matters, following the loss of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles conditioned the loss of any external colonies, and under Article 231, commonly known as the War Guilt Clause, Germany was forced to accept responsibility for initiating the war and pay for all material damages. France's premier at the time insisted on imposing enormous reparation repayments for fear of rapid regeneration by the German people, and while a reparations committee was being established, Germany was required to begin payments of 20 billion gold marks. Yet France's fears were realised. Despite such crippling circumstances, by 1924, the year before filming began by Lang, the Dawes Plan was created. This was an agreement whereby American banks lent money to German banks by mortgaging national assets such as the railways. Consequently, heavy infrastructure and industry emerged. During 1925, therefore, Berlin was the most heavily industrialised city. What is distinct about the Weimar Republic's growth of industry is its German pattern of control. Control of industry was concentrated in the hands of relatively few institutions and individuals. And it is this that Lang expresses through the use of the symbolic figure Joh Friedrichsen, a ruling super-industrialist. According to Ralph Deffelgroff, what emerged from the Industrial Revolution in Germany was an industrial feudal society. Throughout the film, Joh Friedrichsen's movement within each frame is slow and controlled, which is in direct contrast with busied scribes and the movements of his own son, Frieda. Distraught by the recent explosions that caused harm to the workers of the city, Frieda's exclamations, weeping embrace, and agitation directly juxtapose his father's indifference. Enhanced by the soundtrack, Frieda's passionate empathy is met with discordant wind instruments to express his pain. In polarity, Joh Friedrichsen, the identified brain of this city, is cold. Moving to the cymbals and beats of a clock, he is perhaps the greatest machine within the film. Dialogue makes the message explicit, as Frieda's desire to look into the faces of the people whose little children are my brothers, my sisters, is met with Joh Friedrichsen's appraisal that the hands which built this city are indeed where they belong. Conversely, Technological progress had such revolutionary significance for the early 20th century that this era came to be known as the Machine Age. The machine was the single most defining entity, extending beyond industry and into culture through the machine aesthetic in art and design. This machine aesthetic was, of course, of central importance to modernist activity, infusing the work of Bauhaus designers, the Russian constructivist movement, and the defining Italian futurist movement. Lang's Metropolis bears a strong resemblance to the style and purpose laid out in Marinetti's Futurist Manifesto. Strong geometrical lines, clean negative spaces in between objects, and streamlined balance and symmetry are present. However, as the modern Tower of Babel stands as the pinnacle of this urban landscape, the idea that commercialism has become the driving force that will lead to destruction critiques the same city that futurists would have desired to perfect. Furthermore, the film's form is in many ways a celebration of technology and progress. The use of the Schuften process that combined miniature sets, live actors and mirrors to create deep perspectives and large scales of industry to captivate the imagination of its viewers represents this. Such seductive powers of technology, though, can be seen no more clearly than Rotwang's animation of the robot through Maria. Pulsating electrical machines and chemical apparatus, a dazzling display of both scientific and cinematic magic are met with a romantic orchestral piece that gradually builds to a crescendo in time with the robot's animation. Often chosen as the film's cover image, these are some of the most striking within the film. And yet Lang's point is not to worship machines, but rather to permit us to understand how bewitching they can be. The Maschinenmensch itself is such a figure of the machine age, drawing the masses in with alluring charm. Much commentary has been given to the inclusion of such a machine, particularly around issues of gender. Yet this robotic version of the natural can be seen as a symbol of the autonomized, hollowed-out modern self detached from all spirit. It is a detachment, though, that might help us to know ourselves once more, to discern our humanity, and thus to reconstruct the self. In the words of Teleti, the robot's inspirational capacity, its ability in one sense or another to take life, represents nothing less than the indelible imprint of its original, the ghost of man that inhabits the machine. It thus images a possibility for subversion, individuality and self-realization, by suggesting that the imaginary that this world constructs might eventually be turned against itself to free up the self.